Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Development Discourse, where we ideate for Africa's development. My name is Patrick Okigbo, founding partner at Nextier. Nextier is a multi-competency advisory firm focused on solving Africa's most complex development challenges. Over the decades, pundits have offered prayers for Africa in terms of Africa Rising, Africa 2.0, Africa's century. Yet the reality has failed to materialize. Infused with our immeasurable natural resources, we've got over 1.5 billion people, mostly young people. The continent is yet to achieve any liftoff, that's relative to the rest of the world. I want to use this discourse today to explore the choices we must make for the continent to win. Amaka Anku is the head of Eurasia Group's Africa practice. She joins me in this discussion. As head of the firm's Africa practice, Amaka helps clients understand the interaction of politics, policy, and markets across the continent. Her research focuses on Nigeria's politics, African regional trends, and comparative global politics. Amaka is a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations and has taught a graduate course on political risk analysis at Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service. She holds a bachelor's degree from the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton and a Doctor of Law degree from Harvard Law School. Amaka, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Excellent, excellent. So let's go back to my Africa Rising intro. Did we ever rise?
Yeesh. Woohoo! That's a big place to start. Okay, well, then let me start there. So I am one of those people who think that Africa, we don't get enough credit for what we're doing, which is we're doing something that no industrialized country did.
Okay.
Do you know what that is?
Tell me.
Trying to industrialize as democracies. Okay, so if you think about the fact that on the west side of the continent, most countries about 60 years old, just about, right? Think about the US at 60. The US at 60 in 1836 was a mess, right? It was a mess. Only a small portion of the population could vote. Black people, people who look like me couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote, less than half, right? And there were extremely violent elections where they prevented those kinds of people from voting, especially Black people, right? So the point I'm making is, and if you go to Europe, when Europe was industrializing, only rich white men could vote, not even poor white men could vote, right? It's much easier to industrialize when you have such a narrow constituency with fairly narrow or uniform or homogeneous interests, and you can kind of muster the elite consensus you require to do the difficult things that you need to do to industrialize, because industrialization is messy, it's expensive, it's so I say that, to your question, are we right? Yes, it's not just, yes, we have all the potential, yes, we are a mess, but we're also doing something very hard to do. And it's true that Africa often gets defined by the outliers, the Burkina Fasos and the Mali. But if you look at where most Africans live, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, there is no way any of those places are getting a coup. I think we've accepted that this is the path we're taking. We have to do this, in part because we're so diverse. We don't trust, who are we going to trust in Nigeria to be the benign dictator, right? No, it's not going to work. Anyway, so yes. So the way I would answer that question is, yes, we still have a lot of challenges, but at least let's give ourselves this win. We're doing this thing of democracy, which is extremely hard, and we're trying to make it work. So in that way, yes, we have risen.
So let's
figure out the rest.
Yeah. Okay, so let's explore let's explore the approach you've taken, right? If you looked at America at 60 or Europe at 60, that might not be comparing apples and apples, right? Because so if you look at the world, the world's evolution up to maybe the 1300s or the 1500s, it was kind of slow. And then from the 1500s, it took off, right? So if you look at the world up to 1960.
It took off. Yeah, exactly. It took off after World War II.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at the world up to like 1960, it was okay. And then by 1960, when we started getting our independence, we've learned a few things, so you can't compare Nigeria at 60 and America at 60 because there are mistakes the world has made that we should have learned from. And we should have made different choices. So maybe, yes, we're 60. Maybe we should be comparing Nigeria to America at 200. Yeah,
but the point, Patrick, is not about comparison. The point is that industrialization requires political consensus. It requires an elite consensus. And we have to understand. We have to start from the premise of it is harder to achieve that in an incredibly diverse democratic society. Look at the Asian tigers. I'm not saying, it's not about the comparison. It's just a point that I made to make the point. It doesn't mean we still have to figure out how to industrialize as democracies. But I'm just saying, like, it's fair for us to, let's start from the premise of this is harder to do. Okay, now how do we still have to do it? It's harder to do. They had it easier and we have it harder, but at least we've won something, we've done something, we've achieved something that they didn't achieve in that area, which is everybody gets a vote, right? Okay, but now we have to actually make sure that it translates into economic prosperity, because otherwise, and I do worry about this, right? If we cannot show that democracy works to deliver public services, to deliver safety, to deliver, right, that's what we want in life, is safety and economic freedom, right? It will, people will give up on the idea that this is what we should. So I agree with you, right? Like it's not enough to just say we've done democracy. We still have to make it work.
Okay, so I agree with you up to the point that democracy is messy and so on, but just clarify for the audience that you're not saying that democracy is not the way to go. So what you're saying is democracy is still the way to go, but it's difficult, right?
It's difficult. And one of the things I say, absolutely. And I think that we've proven that we've accepted this as the way. I mean, there's still some people complain about it, and that's fair. And I think it's very fair to accept that it is hard to do and it's messy, because otherwise you're not acknowledging, you're not being kind of aware, right, of the problems. But I think that most people, I mean, we have to accept that this is the way that we have chosen to do it, and this is the way that we have to do it, right? And also I don't think it works like this is the way that is most likely to work at this point in this moment and given the global environment, right? So I think it's a foregone conclusion, and we shouldn't waste our time debating whether this is the way or not. This is the way, and we have to figure out how to make it work.
Okay, so now that we've cleared up everyone, what makes democracy messy, and how do we untangle it for Africa?
So let me connect it to the problem that we're trying to solve, which is how do we achieve economic transformation, right? What makes it messy is that the things that you need to do to industrialize, to transform your societies, take a long time. And the one thing that politicians in democratic systems don't have is time, right? So if you look at a country like Nigeria, we have elections every 4 years. That means you have 2 years to get anything done. After 2 years, it's election season again. What are you in 2 years, right?
Yep.
What are you going to get done in 2 years? What do you need to do in 2 years? Fix power, fix roads, right? So that's what makes it hard. Now, how do you get around that? And like the way I think about this a lot, and I always say that you need to, I mean, doing things quickly is one way, right? Like you get in, do the hard things immediately. It will be very painful and people will protest. Then you have the next 2 years to buy them off again, as we always do, right? But it's done. You've done the hard things. But I also think that you need to like build things into systems, right? So pass law, lock yourself into a path that works with the structure, right? So for example, you've passed a law like we did in Nigeria that basically removed fuel subsidies. So at some point it's illegal. At some point you can even sue. Somebody can even sue the government and say, well, PIB said market prices. Why are you not allowing the market prices? You know what I mean? And then the government can say, yeah, the law says this, unless the judges say. So, you know what I mean? So like, that's one of the ways to do it is to figure out, lock yourself. But also, I think what's also very important if we are being realistic, right? And myself as an analyst, as an African, is that you also have to find ways to make industrialization attractive for the elites. Because it costs money and the elites are the people who are going to. The way that you industrialize is that the people who own capital in your society have to be willing to risk their capital, right? They have to be willing to invest money in hard things, in manufacturing plants, in, agricultural productivity, in the thing, because they believe that it will make them money. And because they have a stake in that system for whatever reason. So I think you do have to figure out how to make it attractive for the elites. Yeah. So let me stop talking here. So
and you're opening up so many vistas that I want to go down, and I'm just scribbling, and we'll figure out how to get to all of them.
Figure out which way, which way to go.
But number one, you talked about the short-term, outlook for a politician, right? Which I'm not drawing parallels here, but it's kind of the same challenge that CEOs of, Wall Street face.
Very good.
They've got share prices to watch and so on. But some serious CEOs have also figured out how to extend their time frame. So yes, they're paying attention to share prices, but they're also looking at the value of the enterprise, and building out the value. I don't know if we can draw some lessons from how this has happened. So if you go back to, say, Jonathan, for instance, he had proposed a single term for a Nigerian president, 6 years, and you're done. So if you know that you have only one term, 6 years, you don't get a second dip at this, is that the way to go? Should we be advocating that? What are the pros and the cons to that idea?
Yeah, I don't even know if I want to. Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't like the debates about the structure because I almost feel like it's never, we're not going to change. Look, we're stuck with four-year terms. Like this is not like, let's just figure out how to make the 4-year terms work, right?
Why are you taking that position though?
Because it's even the 6-year, like there are other problems and there are other challenges with nothing is going to be perfect, right? We're never going to get a perfect structure that doesn't also have risks to policy implementation, right?
What's the big risk?
So what I would prefer in a 6-year term, I mean, first of all, the amount of political energy that you would have to put in to change the constitution, to change the term, like, why? That's all time that we don't have, that's all time that we should be spending and political capital that we should be spending doing the important things, which I can talk about. What are the important things we should be doing, right?
Get that soon, yeah.
6-year term, I mean, I mean, on the, from one perspective, you could say that, oh yes, you have to start worrying about election after 2 years. But on the other perspective, you want to get reelected. You want to get reelected, right? So that's still an important motivation. And it should be, if the environment is conducive, that should still be an important motivation to deliver. Versus you're just going to be there for 6 years and you're gone. So just pack up as much as you want, steal as much as you want, and go. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, like, there's also a risk, right? So that's why I prefer, I think, so for me, I think the biggest challenge for most African countries is to get the civil service right.
Okay.
And if you get the civil service right, it will mitigate the political problem of fleeting every 4 years or elections, right? Because if you have a strong civil service and backbench that is not politicized, then it doesn't matter who's at the top, they're getting the work done. They're doing strong regulation. They're doing, you know what I mean? They're doing, and the politicians at the top will be there to set broad direction, right? And that's something that I mean, especially in Nigeria, some countries have stronger civil services, not, perfect, but I think even Ghana has a stronger civil service, Kenya has a stronger civil service, certainly South Africa does. They still have some state capture.
Algeria.
Oh yeah, in North Africa for sure. And a part of the problem, and this kind of starts to go into like what are the concrete things we can do today? A part of the problem in Nigeria is money. Is that we don't pay people well enough to attract the kind of talent that we want, right? You don't see any young person who's like, what I really want to do when I grow up, the smartest kid in your class is to go work for government. People who say they want to go work for government, people who want to, go home at 3 p.m. and take the checks every day. Not to say they're very strong, hardworking people in government, but you know what I mean, right? Like it's not the prestigious thing that it used to be.
Yeah.
And we need to fix that.
So what are these big, difficult things we need to do? You've talked about the civil service. Maybe we go through a list of what these are, and then we talk about what are the conditions, what are the elements that need to be in place for us to be able to do those big things.
So I think the first most important thing that is a prerequisite to anything else, including fixing the civil service, is mobilizing more revenue.
Okay.
My favorite thing to talk about is you have to raise more revenue. And one of the positive effects of raising more revenue is that it also forces you to build a social contract with the people you're governing. And one of the things that we have in Nigeria as a, how do I say, a negative remnant from the military years is that there was a elite consensus under military rule, in my view, that said, military government, don't you dare tax us. And military government were like, don't you dare try to hold me accountable. I'll do whatever I want. And I won't ask for your money to do it. We'll invest in the oil, we'll take the oil out of the ground, we'll sell it, we'll take the money, we'll do whatever you want with it. And you do whatever you want with your money, right?
That's our social contract.
Yeah, exactly. Now that there's no oil money, now that the oil money is drying up, now we need a new social contract that says, you know what? If you guys want good roads and power and all these good things, well, somebody's got to pay for it. You have to pay for it, and we promise to deliver it. And if we don't deliver it, hold us accountable, kick us out of office, right? Which is part of why maybe the second term matters. So for me, a lot of it starts with mobilizing revenue. But then you get to this chicken and egg problem, and Nigerians are like, well, why should I pay taxes? Because I'm not getting any money. Well, you're not going to get anything if you don't pay taxes. So you gotta, we gotta start. And in all these countries you're running to, you pay taxes. So pay taxes, and then hold the government accountable to use the taxes properly,
Why
right?
are you starting from there? Why are you starting from the
Because there's
people
no
paying?
money.
Okay, so why
That's
don't
how
we
it
start?
works every government in the world. You
Okay,
don't deliver services if you don't have money to deliver services.
can we start with fiscal responsibility? Can we start with show us how well you're using what you already got? Yeah,
Yeah.
then we will pay taxes. How about
We can walk and so my father used to tell me when I was young, we can walk and chew gum. It's not one or the other. It's not mutually exclusive. Pay
even
taxes
even in
and
a
hold.
country
You cannot
where
have
there's a trust deficit?
absolutely, but it's not you. The point is, you cannot sit and say they should go and do what they don't have with the money they don't have, and then I'll pay taxes. Pay taxes and hold them responsible for using the money properly, because that's how normal countries work. Normal countries work by collecting revenue and then delivering. Will there be, but we also have to be realistic about what we expect.
Mhm.
Okay. Will there be waste? Will there be inefficiency? There is no government in the world that is not wasteful and inefficient. It's by definition. You're not a, a Wall Street firm, right? And we can talk about what the differences are. That's why you cannot run a country the way you run your business, right? So I do think that we also have to be realistic about like this thing we do sometimes. You go to the budget and you find like, oh, they spend this much and oh, they spend this much. Okay, fine. Let's focus on the important areas of wastage that involve a lot of money, not like the 100,000. This one is like $10,000. Oh my God, why are they spending $10,000 on this, right? Like, and I'm not saying, look, please don't misunderstand me, because I know that this is like a huge thing, and it's not mutually exclusive. Let's not make it a false dichotomy here. It's not wasteful government or no, I don't know what's the alternative, or no government, or so it is the government has to collect revenue and the government has to deliver services.
Okay.
And you have to pay, and then you have to hold them accountable, but don't expect perfection.
Okay. We're not expecting perfection, but we're expecting some minimum level of accountability, right?
Absolutely.
I'm expecting that if you are saying to me, lose weight, you are also trying to lose weight. Yeah. You're not saying to me, lose weight so that you're going to grab the food I gave up, right? So that's number one. Number
And
two.
this is important.
Number two, a common denominator in everything we've said is that the people must be able to hold the government accountable.
Yes.
How do we do that if we don't have the ability to? The democracy that was supposed to give us the ability to hold government accountable has shown that it's not quite working well for us. Yeah, we go to elections, the people we get at the end of the day are not the people we voted for. So how will the people, the masses, hungry, poor, hungry, how are they going to hold government accountable?
So I don't agree with the premise in Nigeria that the people so there are, if you look at every Nigerian election, it broadly at the national level, there are huge, let's be clear. So I've been observing Nigerian elections, at least at national level, for the last few elections. They are very significant challenges. They are very significant irregularities, right? And that has resulted in, differences, especially at the state level, right? So like, but especially when it's close, right? Like in Enugu State, right? Like what really happened? But at the national level, it's very clear to me that the outcomes broadly represent how people voted. Now, if you think about, for example, and let's not make this like a whole conversation about election, but like the person who, 60% of Nigerians voted against the current government. More than 60% of Nigerians voted against the current government. Does that broadly reflect how Nigerians feel? Probably does. Unfortunately, those votes were split between
two candidates.
The candidates, and the 37% candidate won, right? So that's more about political strategy. But I think that we shoot ourselves in the foot if we write off the process and just say, oh, we can't hold them accountable. Yes, we can. And it's only when it's easier, when you write it off, like my father, for example, is like, oh, I'm not going to vote. If you write it up and you don't go to vote, you make it easier for people to steal elections, because people steal elections when the outcomes are really close.
Correct.
Right? In Abia State, they tried, but it was just too far. They couldn't patch it up, right? So people don't write it off. Don't write it off and say, oh, we can't hold them. You can hold them accountable. And you can as if you come out, So let's start from, I want us to start from that premise of you can hold people accountable. And so then what does that mean? It means that, we can still and should still expect the government to use our tax money responsibly.
Okay. So in some other of your writings, you've made this argument for a strong leader, yeah?
Strong states.
Strong state. Can you unpack that for us? Why is that a prerequisite, so to speak, for Africa's development?
Yeah, so just to be clear so that people understand me, when I say strong state, I don't mean a strong leader. I do mean a strong state. I mean strong state capacity. And I think this is extremely important, because some of the way in which the West has exported democracy to us, in my view, it's focused excessively on process rather than on outcomes and on capacity. It's like elections and, the process. Yes, it gave you the outcome you voted for, but it wasn't a perfect process and it should have been perfect. And, okay, fine. But I think that we need to, and all of those things are important to point out the procedural problems, but I think we need to spend more time talking about state capacity and how important it is for democracy. And by state capacity, I mean what a state needs to deliver, and what a democracy needs to deliver is safety, right? Security. You can't have investments and a competitive economy if you can't even go to the farm, right? So when I say strong state, I mean a state that has the capacity to protect its citizens and to invest in the things that make its citizens' lives better. Starting from security, but also just, again, when I talked about civil service, also just in terms of being able to do regulation, right? Because when we talk about markets and we want a market-driven economy, the only way markets work is in the shadow of a strong state. The markets work because if I sell something to you, I want to say, look, Patrick, I'm going to sell you, we agree to sell this at 5 naira, 10 naira. If you steal it from me and you don't pay me, how am I going to get my money back? I have to go to court. That's the state. I have to go to court. And the state has to be able to go and do the investigations and not tell me that they don't have money, there's no light, and I should pay for them to go and do investigation. Like, are you serious? This is not, so like the market, I'm not going to sell this thing to you. I'm not even going to trust that. So you get it, right? Like, I think that we need to focus more on that. And again, it comes down to taxes and revenue because you do because you have to pay those judges well. If you have to pay the police officers well, we can bitch about the police officers and all the stuff they're doing. But honestly, like if I were a police officer and I'm earning this crazy, not a thing that I can't even support my family on, yeah, I'll be on the streets harassing you for money too. Because I'm Nigerian, I'm human like you, and I also want to feed my family, right? So yeah, and then we need to like invest in, intelligence. Crime shouldn't be like, oh, it's happened. Now let's go find out who did it. We should be able to like actually invest in technology that can tell us what people are thinking and spy on them. You get, that's all about a strong state. That's what I mean.
Sure. And so let me chase this one more time, and then we'll talk about industrialization. Liberal democracy is under attack globally. The way it's been pushed in Africa, it's frontlined, human rights and those types of softer issues as prerequisites to democracy, to development, etc.
Yeah.
Do you believe that that's the path we must travel to achieve
Yeah.
development? If not, what's the path you see, given our peculiarities as Africans?
Look, I think we have beat that horse and it's dead. And this is what I mean. And this is what I mean. Like, I don't want to, no, please. The takeaway from what I'm about to say is not that human rights is not important, right? The takeaway is not that. It's not that human rights is not important. It's not that political powers and political openness and all this stuff is important. Of course, it's important. We get it. But we're like, it's like the only hammer. Okay, we talk about if you have a hammer, everything you see is a nail. That's the only thing that the people who were talking about democracy want to talk about all the time. Democracy, political openness, the processes, okay. But like, if the government doesn't even have the capacity to deliver justice for me, right? Somebody came to my farm and ate all my crops, right? So let's just say
cattle ate your crops.
Cattle, yes, not exactly, not them. Cattle came and ate all my crops and destroyed my farm. And I cannot trust that the state, and this sometimes we make it about ethnic rivalries, it's about capacity. People don't remember that in Nigeria, these things are state crimes. Trespass is a state crime. It's not a federal government that you're looking for in federal whatever. There's no capacity at that state level to even prosecute these crimes. Even if you catch them, maybe they'll catch them, tomorrow they've disappeared, they've gone their way. But like, if I cannot trust that somebody will prosecute these people and deliver justice to me, then at the end of the day, what's the point? Like, there's no benefit to me of all this other human rights and openness and all the stuff that you're saying, right? Because you can't even protect my property. So anyways, the point I'm making is that stuff is important, but we act like it's the only important thing, and it's sucking out all the energy in the room. And we need to figure out how to divide our energy, spend as much time talking about delivery, state capacity, the ability of the state, the capacity of the states to do the things we want them to do, versus just corruption and human rights and all that stuff. That's my view.
Fantastic. Now, you and I know, development is not going to happen until we industrialize. Somehow we've got to figure it out. We've got to figure out how to get infrastructure in, economic infrastructure, increase our productivity, drive industrialization. As you look broadly across Africa, and it's something you look at, probably every day, are you seeing any green shoots anywhere? Are you seeing any countries making some fundamental, significant progress along these lines? And what's driving it? What can the rest of us learn from these places?
It's a good question. I think that the problem that many African countries have is being too small and not having strong neighbors. Because a lot of what drove industrialization, a lot of what you need for industrialization is capital. Like you have to be able to attract capital. And it has to start in your neighborhood, right? Like the Asian tigers had Japan, China, in Europe, they had Britain. Of course, the US had Europe, right? And that's a part of why, like, even if you can talk about places like Botswana and, but is it a good, like, yeah, I don't know that there's any really good model, I will say. I mean, people talk about South Africa, but the reason South Africa is where it is today is because they did it when only white men controlled the place, and they didn't have to care about the Black people. They did it for themselves, right? And now Black people took over, and they get to benefit from industrialization. So I definitely don't think that's the good model. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm gonna punt on this one. I don't see any great models, in part because places that are doing it seem to be there's no huge takeoff story, and the smaller countries are doing better, but it's easier when you're in a smaller country, and it's easier in some ways, but it's also no like you get to a place and you get stuck, so to speak. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if you've read this Charlie Robertson's book on the time traveling economist, where he argues that it's high cost of capital that's kept us where we are. And for us to achieve low cost of capital, we've got to fix a high fertility rate, so that we're saving quite a bit of money, and then we can reinvest that money. I don't know if you've thought about high fertility rate in Africa, 8.1 children, in places like Chad and Nigeria, maybe about 7 point something. Any thoughts on how we address this big issue that also ties back into culture and tradition and religion?
Yeah. I don't like those suggestions that the problem is fertility. The idea that we should focus on stopping Africans from having children, it just doesn't sit right with me at all. I just don't think that's the issue. And for other reasons, you can imagine, like, I just don't like, I don't like that idea as the thing that we should focus on. No. What I will say, so to your question so I'll go back to the question of like, who's doing it right? So without like making this like a big, so for example, I think that the place to start is in the agriculture sector, right? If you look at what most Asian tigers did, because it was mostly started with dramatically improving agricultural productivity, right? That's important. And if you look at Africa, most African countries, the majority of the population are somehow tied to agriculture. In Nigeria, it's 25% of economic activity. There's no other sector that is larger by itself, right? Services is like, it's a very different thing. Oil is 6% of our economic activity. Agriculture is 25%, and it touches millions of Nigerians. If you can improve agricultural productivity, you will lift millions of Nigerians out of poverty, who will then have money in their pockets to buy manufactured goods, right? Like you create demand. And one country that I think has done agricultural productivity better is Kenya.
Okay.
Right? So Kenya could be one of those examples. They have other problems. Because, and one of the things, when we go back to the political settlement, I think one of the things Kenya does right with its agricultural sector, of course, it didn't have the problem Nigeria had of having oil, which we call it a problem, the distraction, right? And so there was nothing else. But one of the things Kenya does right is that Kenya's elite make money from its agricultural sector. Kenya's elite see agriculture as a business, not as an intervention, not as charity. And so a lot of rich Kenyans own large commercial farms, benefit from strong government regulation and standardization in the sector that allows them to export. Kenya exports, a lot of Kenya's exports is agriculture related, tea, horticulture, like hibiscus flower, all sorts of things that we wouldn't even imagine. Like nobody's thinking about doing that in Nigeria, but these are big, rich Kenyan elites, including their politicians, making money. And so it's in their, including the president, and it's in their interest to have strong regulation that makes sure that that can also check standardization and make sure that Kenyan exports meet certain standards, because it benefits them to be able to export. In Nigeria, the opposite, in Nigeria, there's let me just tell this story. It's a little bit amusing. In Nigeria, there's like, somebody told me this story recently. In Nigeria, you're more likely to see something like, the pesticide, the only one pesticide you're allowed to use on this certain kind of flower is the one that is imported by one Nigerian in the country, right? Who got an allowance to do it. And now everybody has to do it. But that pesticide, if you use it, you're not going to be able to export anyway.
Exactly.
Right? That's the kind of thing that happens in Nigeria because, again, it doesn't, because we don't care. Because the people who, the elites are not making, no, but this is serious though. I do think that it matters. If the people who have the most power in society were benefiting from an organized, properly regulated agricultural sector, we will have an organized, properly regulated agriculture sector.
I agree with that. And, just by the way, for the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A tab, and we will read them out and give attribution. And I just want to take one of the questions that's in there already. It's from...
Oh, there are questions. Oh.
Yeah. It's from Ola Oyewole. He says, I love the view on creating a strong state. What are the processes to get that done in Nigeria when there are huge obstacles on constitutional amendments? The focus is always on the federal government, which shouldn't be. There seems to be too much power at the center. The earlier we commence the process of devolution of power to states, the better for a stable and prosperous Nigeria. What do you think?
Oh, I love this question. I love this question because it has some misconceptions in it. Sorry, whoever asked this. First of all, when I say a strong state, I don't mean a Nigerian state. I meant the federal government. I meant a strong federal government, a strong center state that can, because it's not your state that is going to monopolize violence in your country. It's not your state that is going to ensure that you can't have some rebel group running wild, and stealing cattle or whatever, right? Like that has to start from the top. So I really do mean, and so the second part of this question though, let me address this, is this idea that states don't have enough power. It's not quite true. In Nigeria, the most income generation power, there's no other federation in the world where the federal government is not allowed to collect personal income taxes that I know of, right? Most federations, either income is collected at the center or twice, right? Center collects, your state collects. In Nigeria, federal government is not allowed to collect federal income taxes. States only have the power to collect income taxes. Federal government only gets 15% of VAT. They're collecting it on behalf of the states and local government. So they get 15%. The only thing the federal government has by itself in terms of collection for revenue is corporate taxes, right? And then maybe it's federal government stuff. So that's one area. That's hugely significant power for states that they don't use. Property taxes, states, that's in states and local governments to collect. What are we talking about? That there's all this power at the center. If the states were actually using this power and collecting taxes and delivering, I mean, what else? Power, money is power, right? That's one. Crime, when you think about security, again, people don't realize this. It's the states that are supposed to prosecute crimes, unless it's a federal crime. Things like assault, things like trespass, all those things are state crimes. So when somebody trespasses on your property and you're shouting federal government, it's your state that actually has authority to prosecute it. People will respond and say, oh, but there's no state police, it's federal police. Yes, yeah, that's fine. There are restrictions. But in terms of the prosecution, build evidence, take these people to court, hold them accountable. That's supposed to happen at the state. The point I'm making here is there's a lot of power already at the state that is not being used. And we should hold the states accountable to using that power versus focusing on this perfect world where we'll get more power that they will then use when they're not using the one they already have.
By the way, I think by the time President Tinubu is done, maybe his legacy would be his effort at devolving more powers to the state and the regions, but I think he's one president that's really pushing in that direction. There's another question that deepens this discussion on strong states. It's from Jonathan Sandy. He says, I agree, strengthening strong state capacity is certainly a prerequisite for advancing democracy and economic growth. That said, apart from adequate salaries or wages to judges and security sector institutions, he has a few concerns or questions. One, and there are a number of them, but one, how do we build these strong state institutional capacities? Two, how do we deal with the challenges associated with identity politics and regional balancing in building strong states, strong Nigeria? What kind of functional and strategic skills are required to ensure state institutions have the capacity to deliver public good? I can repeat any of the questions if you
Yeah, let me just see. I should have that.
From Jonathan Sandy.
I don't see it. From Jonathan? Oh, Sandy. Okay. How do we do with Sandy? Okay. So this is what I would say. So yes, you identified one, which I did mention. Pay people living wages, right? Pay people things that they can live on so that they're not focused on how to harass people to feed their families. That's number one. But then you also have to, some things you have to reorganize. There are a lot of people that we do hire in government, at least at the federal level, who don't need to be there, right? So you can rationalize, we need more teachers, more agricultural extension workers, and less people in offices pushing paper work, right? That all they're doing by pushing that paperwork is, using their discretion to get some benefit so they can push your paper, right? That kind of thing. So I do think there needs to be some rationalization. It's not just pay people well, reduce the size, make it more efficient, leave people in offices that need to be in offices and pay them better, move everybody else to the field. We need more people advising farmers on what seeds to plant, when, the kinds of things that will improve productivity after proper training, better, more teachers, better teachers, more police officers, and less people in offices. And then we need, apart from salaries, unfortunately, it does all connect back to paying the civil service well. But you also need to stop impunity, right? So that goes to your question. Like, if the justice and even the signaling, what Patrick was saying in the end, like if you're not tightening my belt, why should I? But I think it even goes beyond that to say you have to have accountability in your government to create institutions. There has to be clear rules. And that's part of why I say put things in laws. Even if it's not a law, it could be a guidelines. This is how we do stuff. If this department is going to have a procurement transparency. This are the procedures we're going to follow, and if we don't follow these procedures, hold us accountable for it, right? So building institutions is about having the right people in the right places, paying them well, but also accountability. If they don't follow the processes, they should have consequences. There should be prosecutions for people who are doing things the wrong way in government until you build the right culture. So that's how you build strong capacity. And then the people who are like, regulation is important also, strong capacity, in the sense that people always say government should get out of the way. I don't think so. We need more government, but it should be doing what they should be doing smartly, right? They should be making sure that farmers, that the goods that people want to export are up to a certain standard, right? Not extorting people, that kind of thing, right? Like you need more people, more regulation, but it's smart, consistent, predictable regulation. And that's how you would build strong capacity.
Another part of his question was on identity politics, especially in strong states in countries where you've got, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, etc.
Yeah.
And this is not just a Nigeria question, it's across many countries in Africa.
It's a good question. Justice. My answer to that is justice, because if you think about every ethnic group in Nigeria, fundamentally, the problem is a perception of injustice. What they forget sometimes is that they're not alone in that. Everybody thinks it's just them. The Igbos are like, oh, they're so unjust to us. Well, no, not really. Like if this Muslim Hausa farmer, sometimes somewhere in the north, some group comes and attacks them, and there's no justice for them. They feel they're also a victim of the state of the poor states, right? So the point I'm making is, if you had, again, it's difficult to get there, it's not an overnight thing, but if you had consistent application of rules, everybody, you would take away half of the ethnic problems that we have, right? It still won't remove the people who just want hegemony. Those people will be there. But let them be the fringe minorities who just want the hegemony, right? If everybody, and at the end of the day, if you are able to do your business with clear, predictable outcomes, you won't be bothered with the people who want hegemony now, right? Because you're able to achieve your own outcomes. So I think for that one is about justice. And it's about empowering, having like stronger judicial and systems and actual ability to force accountability.
Yeah, so we've got 3 questions from Ayotunde Adeloye, and we'll pick some of them. The first one is, Africa is often caught between leveraging global partnerships for development and resisting neo-colonial economic models. What concrete steps can African nations take to rebuild or build self-reliant economies while still engaging equitably in global trade and climate negotiations?
I like this question. Thank you for picking this question, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot in this moment. In this moment where Trump is undoing the global world order, and I think that there's some Africans who think this could be positive. Let me just remind us that the liberal international order, as hypocritical as it is, as much as it didn't, it's perpetuated Africa at the bottom of the global hierarchy, it delivered decolonization, right? It was the liberal order that delivered decolonization. If you look at the Atlantic Charter, the principles of it, self-determination, respect, and it not only did it deliver decolonization, it also delivered an Africa that doesn't have a lot of interstate wars. As messy as we think it is, with all the interstate fighting, nobody is trying to change their borders. I mean, most people are not trying to change their borders. Like Nigeria gave away some land somewhere, right, for free. Let's take it.
Although we're not sure what M23 is trying to do, though.
And it's not a coincidence that it's happening now, in my view. It's not a coincidence that it's happening now when Kagame knows Trump doesn't care. We give them minerals. Anyway,
Or that
so the point I'm making is
we've moved beyond the rules-based world order to spheres of influence, so
and
if
we don't want that. So
strong enough,
the point I'm making is that new world is could be very dangerous for Africa, right?
yeah.
Where if you have a world where the strong take what they can and they don't pretend to play nice, which is what we have now, it's hypocritical, but at least they're pretending to play nice. This one, we just do whatever we want. We are the weakest people in this whole global order. So if this is not helpful for us. But so what do? I think it's very important for Africa to have strong leadership in this moment, right? The times when Africa has united and acted and had common cause was when we've achieved the most, like during the independence era, right? There was a strong sense of Pan-Africanism and, Ghana got the independence and like, we're not independent, everybody else is, right? I think the way to achieve that now, what we would need now is stronger economic leverage. The way we get stronger economic leverage is by stronger economic integration. Because many African countries, if you take out South Africa and Nigeria, many of these countries, if you look at Burundi is like a $2 billion economy.
Yep.
New York is $2 trillion. If you're an investor, like Burundi is one street in New York, guys. Why should I go all the way to Burundi and set up shop or do anything when I can go to the street in New York and it's easier, right? Like, and you can play that argument for any number of all these small countries that is not as small as Burundi. I say all of that to say that's, having the African free trade agreement where you have a 3.5 trillion economy, it's still not humongous, but it's way bigger than any country can marshal, gives you so much more leverage than on your own. How do we get there? I think my own proposition is that Nigeria and South Africa need to work together and rally. They have the financing to even, for example, set up an aid agency. We can set up an African aid agency. How much was USAID actually given? By the time you take out the 70% that they're paying to American contractors, right? How much actually right? Like,
I think it was a total of 60 billion.
So okay. In Africa or in the world?
In Africa.
Okay. So take out 70% of that. Yeah. Basically, to go to contractors, right? Like, we can afford a good chunk of that. You can afford to like capitalize a $10 billion aid agency and help some of the poorer African countries. Anyway, the point I'm making is have some clear agendas that Nigeria and South Africa can agree on. Pull in the Kenya, the Egypt, the Ghana, whoever else. Have a common position. If you want our mineral resources, here's what you need to do. Everybody hold the line. You have more leverage and you can actually, and then of course, even beyond that, just the economic integration, standardizing your regulation so that it makes it easier for, South African businesses firms to do business in Nigeria and vice versa. Everybody grows. Lifting tide lifts everybody. I think that's what is needed in this moment. Self-reliance has to be about regional cooperation, not every country, right? Because a strong Nigeria can invest in neighboring countries, right? And if you invest in neighboring countries and you create more stability, it will attract more people to want to come to Nigeria to produce in Nigeria so they can sell, not just in Nigeria, but to the region, to a broader region.
Actually, I think that, just to strengthen your argument, and I read your essay on, the stronger Nigeria-South Africa partnership, brilliant. But I think even to strengthen it is if you take a Nigeria that's producing power and putting into the West Africa power pool, if Nigeria decides to be an exporter of power, yeah? So, because the problem we have with power in Nigeria is that internally, we're not paying for the power we're using, right? But if you sold externally and made money, you could have businesses that produce in Nigeria, sell to the West, and sell their excess capacity within the country, right? So that's one. And then by selling power into the West Africa power pool or the South Africa power pool, you're helping smaller African countries grow their industrialization, etc. Number two, what we can do with critical minerals. So all the critical minerals that
Mm.
we need for this fourth industrial revolution, most of them are here in Africa. Now, how do we
Mm.
negotiate those critical minerals? If we're negotiating as individual countries, we're not strong enough. But if we're negotiating frameworks, across Africa, then it gives us a stronger leverage position with the rest of the world. But anyway, just some
Yeah.
ideas.
So I absolutely agree with that. And just to add one thing to that before you move on, if you don't remember anything else from this conversation, I want people to remember exports. Selling things to the external world is the way to get richer. It's the way to grow, right? And that applies to Nigeria too. Like selling things to the region doesn't even have to be, it's easier for us to sell things to the region and South Africa than Europe with all the standardization problem, right? So this idea that people are afraid of AFCFTA, no, like you can expand your markets because what it allows you to do is you're tapping into other people's income and bringing it into the country, which then expands the ability to even buy from those other people, and everybody grows. And that's how we created so much prosperity on the global level in the last 30 odd years, right? It was a lot of free trade. Anyway.
And my friend Najim Animashao just encapsulates it with this phrase: in a multipolar world, a velvet fist of African countries acting in concert is far stronger than the strongest iron finger.
Yes, I like that. So I want the guys look at, I'm writing a piece in Foreign Affairs about this, a much longer piece than the one about why Nigeria and South Africa need to work together. So let's see if they step up
We're looking out for it. But
to this challenge.
Another question from Ayotunde Adeloye, which I think is, very interesting, is Africa contributes less than 4% of global emissions, but faces disproportionate climate impacts. How can the continent industrialize sustainably without replicating the global north's fossil fuel mistakes? And what concessions should African leaders demand at COP30 to make this possible?
A good question. I don't know if I'm the person. I'm not really, to really answer this. I'm not really a climate expert, but what I will say, my own view is don't do what you need to do as Africa. That's my view. Do what you need to do. What are they going to come and do? Why do you need to focus energy trying to get concessions? The argument has been made. Everybody understands. Look, the amount of emissions that Africa is putting out there is so negligible compared to what everybody else is doing, that if you can leverage a cleaner, like most African countries are not even using coal, right? Like that's only a South Africa problem. In most places, it's mostly gas, right? And many African countries, energy grids are very green. Zambia is mostly hydropower. Kenya is very, very green. So I think that there are ways. So to be fair, there are ways to do it in a cost-effective way, but in many places, it's still more expensive. Like to go solar is still more expensive than the gas option. And that should not be a deterrent to pursuing the gas option, is my view, right? But we can walk and chew gum, which is you can continue to develop your gas resources while also finding cost-effective ways to do more solar, hydro, and other things that are more climate friendly.
And just because you mentioned foreign affairs and, because you're a 10 member of the Council on Foreign Relations, I've got to, talk about this emerging new world order, right? So from the end of the Second World War until probably the early 2000s, most countries abided by this rules-based system. And it started breaking down, not from Donald Trump. I mean, it started breaking down before that. America's Iraq war, was part of that breakdown of the international rules-based world, But I think where we are today is you've got a China, that's looking for its sphere of influence, Russia, that's pretty much a small country, still pretending it's the Soviet Union, but looking to play bigger. And then you've got the Erdogans and, now Trump, who wants to annex Canada, who wants the bite of,
Yeah. Yeah.
of America and not Mexico, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Where does that leave Africa? Yeah. Where does that leave us in this? And you've talked a bit about what it could mean for our own internal politics, right? But where does it leave us in terms of the evolving, the shifting currents? What does it mean for us?
Yeah.
If cut off aid, where is the development support going to come from? Do we look east to China? Do we keep a relationship with the West? What should African leaders be thinking about right now?
So first, let me just say one thing that I would say about the order, because we talked about it a little bit, is that I don't think it was really breaking down. To be clear, I agree with you that the US and its allies were hypocritical in the order. But I think it's different from saying the breakdown. I think the current moment is unique in the breakdown. This is what I mean. It was inevitable that the most powerful country in the world would not just would always seek to exert that power, right? The reason it was still a liberal rules-based order is that they still pretended to play by the rules, even when they weren't. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's the point I'm making is that there was never going to be a better, there was no middle ground. There was no ooh, humble America that's only going to do what the world wants, or, to me, that was never actually politically feasible, right? So what we have now is America not even pretending to play by the rules, right? And so this is really a breakdown. Like before, it was just it's hypocritical, it's true, but this is really a breakdown where you're not even pretending, and not only are you not pretending, you're even threatening annexing other people, right? It's completely crazy. So okay, where does it leave us? I think it's dangerous for Africa, but there are opportunities, and the opportunity will depend on real strategic thinking from Africa. One of the opportunities is some new thing has to evolve. And in some new thing you're evolving, other parts of the world need new partners. Whether it's China, for example, that can no longer depend on exporting its things into the US or Europe, for example. China is still a poor country in some ways. It's a middle-income country. It's the second most powerful country in the world, but it still has a lot of poor people. It still needs to continue to grow, which it needs markets for its goods. So in some ways, you can think about it in one way, that China still needs an engine, like an Africa, a place that is growing fast, that can buy a lot of stuff from it to power its growth, right? So that's an opportunity if China is also thinking like that. It's an opportunity with Europe, right? Because we're probably closer to Europe than they are to the US, right? Potentially. So a Europe that's looking for new partners for their goods, export markets, whatever, can be looking more seriously at Africa. So it's an opportunity to have new partners, but again, only an opportunity if African countries actually seize the opportunity, which is what we've talked about before in terms of what we need to do to seize the opportunity. Leaders need to step up, and they need to work more closely together. And we also need to be very alive to the risks that I talked about, which is, we've seen this movie before. It didn't end very well for Africa. It was called colonization. We are the weakest of the weak, right? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm just saying in a world where you take what you want I mean, in some ways the risk is mitigated because it's hard to grab from the weak. It's easier to threaten Canada than it is to just go, it's kind of like if you see three men beating some woman on the streets, the chances are you're more likely to step in to try to save the woman versus if it's two men fighting, right?
Yeah.
So there's some maybe mitigation, but we still need to be alive to those risks. And it doesn't even have to be somebody else coming from the external. It can be internal, like Rwanda and M3 and DRC, like more chaos internally. So there's opportunities, but we need to be alive to the risks.
So another movie we've seen is the Cold War, right? So
Oh yeah.
the Cold War, we had options, either look east or west. Nkrumah said,
Right.
look forward.
They don't work. Yeah. And it
So
was just a mess. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
And
I
that's where the unity internally really matters. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's where I'm going to again, maybe just to double
Yeah.
underline that if we're going to play this movie again, and we remember how it kind of played out the last time, where some looked east, some looked west, and how the internal turmoil that came with it, what are some of the things African leaders should be paying attention to today so that we don't get stuck in that war again?
Yeah.
And suffer what we
Good
suffered the
question.
last time. Yeah.
Look, I think it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of being more strategic, having common positions, and holding the line, having a common front to whether it's your east or west partners, right? Because the point you're making is that it's easy to divide and conquer, which is part of what that was what happened in the Cold War. Then you just ended up people were divided, it was a mess, like internal civil war, somebody supported here, yeah. Like, so the only way I think to avoid that is to have a very, strategically conscious foreign policy that is focused on economic diplomacy and attracting investments and is consistent, right, regardless of your partners and coordinated with at least the key regional leads, right? Again, Nigeria, South Africa, whoever else is in, Nigeria, Ghana, for West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think it really just it comes down to being very strategic. Unfortunately, because a lot of our countries have so many internal problems, there's not a lot of strategic thinking going into foreign policy. There's not even a lot of focus going into foreign policy at all. I do really commend the current Minister for Foreign Affairs in Nigeria, who has been, with very little resources, going out and trying to raise Nigeria's voice and saying the right things and being very measured and thoughtful. We need more of that.
And that brings me to another question. I mean, you're currently in Washington, D.C., and all the turmoil that's going on in the polity. Who's speaking for Africa? Who's curating Africa's position, Africa's voice, and ensuring that the current administration is paying attention to it? Is there anybody
Nobody.
in that role?
No.
No. Shut.
Nobody. And Nigeria should help. Look, Nigeria doesn't even have an ambassador right now in the US. So that's another, I mean, I know lots of my friends have been like distressed about this. And, apparently there's no money. The thing that Nigeria cuts historically is the, foreign service when there's no money because it costs a lot of money to deploy ambassadors or their families, apparently. But yeah, it's a huge void. It's a huge
But
void.
it seems like a missed opportunity for Nigeria, especially as the US is looking at Africa, looking at partners, looking at people who to work with. Again, it's going to be
They
very
need to
transactional,
say fast.
but
Yeah,
people
I
to
agree.
talk to. And if we don't have a presence to galvanize the African voice, it just appears to be a seriously missed
It's
opportunity.
a it's a huge missed opportunity unless they fix it. Like they need to fix it quick,
Mm.
quick. Yeah. Especially don't deploy any other ambassador, but send somebody to DC.
Yeah. Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah.
So let's see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay. Now, maybe this is, hardcore economics question, but how do we accelerate industrialization in a hyperinflationary, stagnant, and high debt profile country like Nigeria? I don't know if you've given thought to this question because it's
Yeah.
one that's really top of mind for the administration.
Yeah, look, like I said before, I think agric, you have to start with agric. That's my view.
Mm.
And I have not yet seen, so I think they've done a lot of good things. I think removing economic distortions was a good step. Removing the subsidies was a good step, in my view. I think they could have gone about liberalizing the FX markets differently, but they've done it and we're here. So fine, let's move forward and not backwards. So, they did it the way they did it. We're here. Things are getting better. And I think what I have not seen yet is a coordinated whole of government plan for growth and to grow domestic production and non-oil exports. And I really think it has to start with the agricultural sector. And it has to start with a true mentality shift about how government sees. Right now, government still sees the agricultural sector as like something they should do. You don't have don't come and do stuff. Just create the environment and regulate it properly so that the sector can thrive as a business, right? It's not a government activity. Yeah, so I mean, things like building agricultural road, finding a way to support building of storage facilities, even if it's like creating incentives or loans or giving, cheaper loans to people who are doing it, things like that. And I think look, I've talked to some really smart people in Nigeria who are thinking about this. They just need to be empowered. Not only do they need to be empowered, and there needs to be like clear, they need to be empowered, but it also needs to be like, it needs to be like a clear priority from the top to create coordination so that everybody is kind of pushing towards the same thing. I just don't see another way to start. I think it has to be with agriculture. You have to start by raising productivity of the largest part of the economy, right? Yeah, and then you can take it from there. Other things you can do, but I feel like that has to be the starting point.
Yeah, I think agriculture, maybe power, maybe just to drive very aggressively to increase access and supply, and then just break the
That's
back
a
of,
great answer.
you've got
On
to
what? Break the
insecurity.
back of what? Oh yeah, exactly. Those are three very good priorities. Those are three very good because you also can't have a productive agricultural sector with rampant
Without it.
insecurity. Let's just
Yeah,
be serious. And maybe you even put that first. Who's gonna go to the farm? Who's even
exactly.
gonna go to agricultural extension program when I might get killed on my way there? Like, no. So it's an important one.
Yeah, and then yeah,
Yeah. But
talking
the way
about
you get that too is like you also have to resource. It's just like, we don't even trust the army. Okay, so if you give them money, then it'll be like, oh, they're wasting the money. So like it has to be done properly. You have to resource the security services, but you have to make sure that in resourcing them, that they're actually delivering, buying the things they need to buy and not disappearing the money. So it has to be done very thoughtfully. Yeah.
And I mean, again, on insecurity, we've got to talk about this thing that popped yesterday with the president of Nigeria, Tinubu, declaring a state of emergency in Rivers State.
It's a big
As
problem.
someone who watches the continent and who
Yeah.
also paid a close attention to insecurity and oil price
Yeah.
and oil production in the
Yeah.
Niger Delta, what are your thoughts? What was the first few things that crept into your mind when you heard that announcement, and how do you think this whole thing is
Yeah.
going to play out?
Man, first my thoughts is this is a problem for Tinubu. This is the first real big political problem he has because he's been walking all over the opposition like a piece of cake. No, this is a problem because not handled right, it has a potential to hurt oil production at a time when prices are already low, which could hurt FPI, which could hurt the stability in the naira. So I think it's a problem, and I think that's probably why he's intervened. in the first place. Given some of the statements that were made by the governor. I don't know how it's going to play out. Actually, the job I have, so I spent most of this week writing about what Trump is probably going to do in South Africa in terms of sanctions because of what happened on Friday. And my job after this panel is to figure out what the HELL is happening in rivers and what's, because now I need to write about that, So that's the thing that I'm going to be focusing on probably for the second half of this week. I don't know how it's going to end, but it's definitely a challenge, a significant challenge for Tinubu's administration.
The problem is that we always run out of time on this program. And let me just make a few announcements and I'll come back to you and ask maybe one more question and we call it a wrap. Next week, same time, I'll be speaking with Professor Eka Ite. She's a director of Africa Leadership Center at King's College London. And we'll talk about Africa's renaissance, strengthening Africa's creative and industrial ecosystem. 2 weeks after that, I will speak with Dr. Jess Castellotti, director of Yemisi Shillong Museum at the Pan-African University, and we'll speak on dreams and flourishes, art as a catalyst for change. And Amaka, is there any question you thought I'd ask that I didn't get to?
No, I think we've had a pretty comprehensive conversation. So.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay.
It's always a joy speaking to you, and thanks for helping us unpack, many of these choices tough choices though, difficult choices we have to make if Africa is going to have a chance at, catching the future, so to speak. So thank you so much, Amaka. It's a pleasure having you.
All right.
And
it was great. All
we'll
right.
do it
Take
again.
care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Bye. And thanks everyone.